A day at the zoo. How could we have grown up without it? Ferocious lions, playful elephants, and funny monkeys. A family occasion, a part of our education.
Perhaps even the facts of life. If you see something happening, that might be the moment.
And our entertainment.
Gosh, there was an elephant and you could ride on Rosie.
Not everything always went to plan.
Really, the keeper was very glad at the end of the day when the animals hadn't sort of consumed any of the visitors.
And not everyone agrees with keeping animals in captivity.
Quite simply, it's wrong to hold animals captive in order that people can go and look at them.
So, where did this love affair for the rest of us start?
The first giraffe was walked from London docks. And fancy seeing a giraffe. You don't know what a giraffe is.
And how have zoos evolved? From Regency high science to 1930s showmanship. Post-war reinvention and the challenge of conservation. This is the story of Britain's Day at the Zoo.
I'd seen pictures in books, but I'd never seen anything like this, ever.
Going to the zoo is something most of us take for granted. It's one of childhood's rites of passage. For a short while, we get up close with animals from another world, and they become etched in our memories for a lifetime.
I mean, we used to bring things from home to feed the elephants. We'd buy a packet of biscuits to eat ourselves, and we'd give it all to the elephants. We'd break off branches and give it to the giraffes. Things that wouldn't be allowed today. I mean, I hope we never killed any of them, but I don't think we did.
I think certainly there was a kind of an idea of what a zoo should contain, and you almost got your Ladybird book of zoo animals, yeah, rhinos, giraffes, elephants, zebras, the kinds of things you'd expect to see in a zoo. What do you got on the zoos, the brown signs on the motorways around this country? It's elephants. Actually, very few zoos have elephants in the UK now, but it's still kind of inextricably linked with the idea of what a zoo is, to have those big, iconic animals.
Perhaps we can think about zoos as places and spaces of nostalgia, that children are taken to zoos by their parents and they see these wonderful creatures, and that when they grow up and they're looking for family outings, they're taking their children. So the parents are telling stories about the places they went to when they were children.
It's more of a thrill to actually think you can hold something in your hand and give it them, hoping your hand is still be there when you brought it back. Oh, we didn't feed lions and tigers. Oh no, we got the, no.
There are important scientific things going on in zoos. They've got important breeding programs, but the public space, it's about families and parents taking children. So I think they're important places of nostalgia and storytelling about wild animals.
Our story takes us back to 1838 and a young scientist who was captivated by the weird and wonderful animals at the zoo. None other than Charles Darwin.
Two days since, when it was very warm, I rode to the Zoological Society. Such a sight has seldom been seen as to behold the rhinoceros kicking and rearing. The elephant was in the adjoining yard, squealing and braying like half a dozen broken trumpets.
London's Zoological Gardens in Regent's Park had opened in 1828 amidst an explosion of interest in science. The place was a living catalogue of all the known creatures in the animal kingdom, the very first scientific zoo. Entry was a members-only affair for chaps like Darwin and guests, and it displayed creatures that were so exotic even Darwin had never seen them before.
It was at London Zoo that Darwin first saw man's closest cousin.
Theories, but the Zoological Society was strapped for cash. Its large collection of animals was costly to feed and maintain. The zoo needed a new source of income, and so in 1847, the unthinkable happened. The gates were opened to the general public. It was transformed from an exclusive enclave in Regent's Park to a day out with a difference for ordinary citizens.
So if you can imagine cages upon cages of lions and tigers, all quite small areas, the noise, the smell, plus then hundreds and thousands of people jammed into these houses as well, trying to see the animals as the keepers were trying to feed them, and so there was smells of meat. The smells must have been quite incredible, the noise must have been quite incredible. But one could say that it was a full sensory experience. It did give people the sights and smells of wild animals.
Even in these early years, there were already a few essentials needed for the full zoo experience, and possibly the most important of all was feeding time. Although knowledge of animal needs was a bit sketchy, and sometimes odd things appeared on the menu.
So typically, in the early years, animals would be given, carrots or kind of apples stewed in sugar, or kind of types of rice and flour, maybe, rum and stout. All this sort of stuff was given to the animals because it was thought to kind of make them more hardy, particularly kind of stout and rum.
But to really keep the public happy, you need a showcase animal.
So in order to get people to come to pay to the zoo, they need to have exotic novelties, strange animals that will attract people, and these are the kind of flagship animals, the event animals.
It wasn't enough to have the same old stuff. The public could look forward to seeing the odd escapee, or perhaps someone falling into the bear pit. But what zoos have always needed to keep the punters coming are new and exciting headline acts. London's first attempt was a hippo called Obeish. I have seen the hippo both asleep and awake, and I can assure you that, asleep or awake, he is the ugliest of the works of God.
So Obeish was a hippopotamus that was caught on the Upper White Nile in 1849 as a calf. Its mother certainly was killed in the process of catching the animal, and it was brought to Southampton on the steamer Ripon, and there were many crowds there to greet the animal when it arrived. Now the press really built this up because the translation of hippopotamus, which is Latin, is river horse. So there's this idea that this is a horse that lives in rivers, in water, and when people see the hippo, Obeish, they're disappointed because it looks more like a grey pig. Essentially, this is not to them a horse. This is really disappointing. Why have we got this fat grey hippo? This sense of this is not other or exciting or novel or curious enough. It's just a bit dull.
Despite the anticlimax, Obeish doubled the number of visitors through the gates. For a short time, the hippo became part of popular culture as a figure of fun. Obeish was missing one key ingredient for a fickle public. He just didn't have the personality. However, the zoo's next big acquisition would be a real character and became a British animal icon. Jumbo the elephant was the ultimate star attraction.
Jumbo was an amazing elephant, but he was an extraordinary sized elephant. He grew and he grew and he grew to literally being jumbo sized.
Everybody came to the zoo to see Jumbo. He was almost worth the admission price by himself. He was a huge beast.
Jumbo became a national emblem. So Jumbo became not only an event animal, but he had something about him which meant that his popularity endured. And that's quite different from Obeish. Obeish, his popularity was fleeting, just for a few years. But with Jumbo, there's something about the elephant as a species that makes it quite attractive. It means we can relate to it. It means we can turn it into a personality very easily. And that's the case with Jumbo, who becomes a personality in himself. He becomes a British elephant, a London elephant.
Jumbo became so famous that he lent his name to anything supersized. But Jumbo was maturing, and older male elephants have a habit of getting cranky. Before long, their star animal was becoming a danger to the public, and something needed to be done.
Then there was an opportunity from the great circusman Phineas T. Barnum, who wanted to exhibit the most amazing animals, to offer to buy Jumbo, which to the Council of the Zoo was a wonderful opportunity, a real solution to their problems. To the people of London, it was the worst thing ever. There was Jumbo's wife, as she was called, Alice. Alice was going to be forlorn because Jumbo was going to be moved away. There was questions asked at the highest levels of government and any various petitions and everything possible to keep Jumbo back in London Zoo.
We can't possibly sell him to America, to a showman's affair.
Despite the chorus of complaints, Jumbo was sold to Barnum for £2,000.
Eventually he sailed and met a rather untimely end, crossing some railway tracks. He didn't move, and Matthew Scott, who'd gone with him, couldn't encourage him to move, and he was hit, sadly, by an unscheduled train.
The outcry at Jumbo's departure showed how close the zoo was to the public's heart. That this British beast should be sold to an American was an affront enough. But even worse, Barnum's outfit had no scientific credentials. The zoo was not a circus. But whatever the lofty aims of the institution, visitors still demanded that they put on a good show.
Bears were exhibited in pits, and in those pits there was a big tree or something that the bears could climb up. And you could buy a bear prodding stick at the entrance. So you could just get this bear to move, you could just gently give it a nudge with this stick. You could feed the animals, of course, in those days. You could actually bring in food. And some people were bringing in pilchards and things to feed to the penguins and the sea lions. In those days, people were encouraged. They'd paid their admission fee to come in, and they considered their right to go round the collection and cajole, if you like, the animals into moving or putting on some sort of a show for them.
By the turn of the century, the zoo experience had become well established. London had competition from other animal collections and was beginning to struggle again financially. It was no longer enough to simply show beasts in cages. People wanted more from their day at the zoo. The whole act needed to be more spectacular. So the zoo turned to a German showman called Karl Hagenbeck for a big new idea.
I think a revolutionary movement occurred with Hagenbeck, particularly in his zoo near Hamburg. Hagenbeck was an animal collector, he supplied animals to zoos, but he established his own zoo, and he wanted a different kind of theatre.
Hagenbeck thought he could improve on the small cages that the Victorians had used. His revolutionary idea was to put the animals in naturalistic-looking panoramas that made it seem as if they could happily roam around together. It was a dramatic spectacle based on an optical illusion.
So he was creating landscape designs for animals, where you could have animals on mountains behind other animals. You might have predator and prey together, and it looked that they could interact, but they couldn't. There were moats between them.
Fundamentally, it was about impact. Seeing these animals with zebra in the front, lions in the back, birds behind, gave an incredible impact and display.
It was time for London Zoo to pull up its socks and embrace the 20th century. They commissioned a new enclosure that recreated a panoramic mountain vista out of reinforced concrete. It was named the Mappin Terraces after the crown jewellers Mappin and Webb, whose glittering profits had paid for it.
Oh, how I wish at times I could have seen that, with all of these animals, with all of the mountain goats on top of the Mappin Terraces, with polar bears, with black bears, with grizzly bears, with Kodiak bears, with then all the pigs and the different various species of pigs, and then penguins in the front. It was undescribable in terms of the amount of animals that were on those Mappin Terraces and the impact and the visual display.
Suddenly people could see all these animals against what they considered to be a natural setting. Most people hadn't been abroad, of course, and people didn't have TV, so they couldn't see what the animal's natural habitat was like. So they imagined that this is what the Arctic must look like for the polar bears. This is what the South American pampas must look like for the peccaries.
However, welfare, was it the best display? It was of its time.
The vast concrete mountains may not have been the best for its inhabitants, but they certainly looked the part. This naturalistic new world, where the beasts appeared to roam free, caught the imagination of one particular family. Out on a day at the zoo with his son Christopher, A.A. Milne came across a black bear called Winnie. Christopher was smitten by the uniquely friendly bear, and Winnie the Pooh was born. It was a sign of the times. Over the years, attitudes towards animals had gradually been changing. We'd become a nation of pet owners. Industry was replacing beasts of burden with combustion engines, and we read animal stories to our children.
There's an increasing sense of anthropomorphism, which is turning animals into humans, essentially, or giving them human characteristics. And increasing kind of ways in which that's done through films and various kind of books means that people are relating to animals more as little people, little furry people, less animal, more human. And this means that when they see them in kind of cramped spaces, they can more easily envisage themselves in those spaces. And I think that's what's kind of going on. It's about empathizing. It's about thinking, I wouldn't want to be in those spaces. Those creatures I can see are a bit like me, and so therefore they must hate it there. And I think that's what's kind of informing it. There's this sense of an increasing kind of proximity, emotional and experiential proximity between the human and the animal.
The views about animals were getting more sentimental, and zoos had to take note. Entertainment was blurring the boundaries between humans and zoo creatures. Our little furry friends were made to act like little people, and chimps' tea parties were a result.
The chimps were out of their enclosure and now really acting like humans. Pouring tea for each other, drinking out of cups, but making a mess of it. They're naughty, they're misbehaved, but slightly behaved.
They were popular because they were basically like little children. Children loved them because the chimps were misbehaving. They were throwing the jelly around, they were cramming stuff into their mouth, had no manners whatsoever. All the things the children would have loved to have done at home, but were prevented from doing so.
By the 1930s, the bars and cages of the old school zoo had fallen firmly out of favour. No one wanted places that looked like animal jails anymore. And 250,000 people clamoured to get in.
As we were only young, it seemed as if we were walking and walking and walking. And then we saw the crowds. Not hundreds, thousands. absolutely. And I said, we're going to get in, you know. Mum, hummed and hawed, because I thought, oh, we're going to have to wait for hours and hours, which we did.
Building an entire zoo without the Victorian bars was the perfect way to make the public feel closer to the animals and less troubled about their captivity.
So losing the bars is about presenting the animal in a happy state, in a less distressed state, in a less captive state. So people going to the zoo are becoming progressively less inclined to want to see animals visibly restrained by small spaces and bars. So removing the bars allows them to see the illusion of freedom. And it is an illusion because they're in on the joke. Like, they know this. You know, people aren't going there thinking, wow, these animals are actually free. They know they're not, but it's presenting them as such. And so I think it alleviates this kind of sense of disquiet.
One of the reasons for that also because, you know, people go to the zoo, they want to take photographs, and bars don't make good photographs. People could get a better view of the animals. It was a more pleasant viewing experience. And of course, that psychological idea of animals being behind bars was taken away.
I mean, the bars have a lot of connotations to them, the sense of the prison, but also the sense of the madhouse, the asylum. So people would in the 19th century go to asylums to see the inmates as a spectacle. And I think all of this adds up to a sense of disquiet and unease at animal captivity.
Dudley was the work of Russian architect Bertold Lebetkin, who had some radical notions about designing a zoo. His enclosures weren't just barless, they were also modernist masterpieces that made the animal perform for the public. It was an idea he first tried out on enclosures at London Zoo.
In the penguin pool, it's constructed in such a way as to make the penguins be penguin. You have the ramp that goes up from the pool to kind of upper level, and that's intended to make the penguins waddle, be penguins. I've come to see the penguins be penguins. I really like penguins, they're funny. They walk amusingly, and now I can see that at the Lebetkin Penguin Pool.
But at Dudley, Lebetkin had an entire zoo to play with, and he perfected his craft. Polar bears would jump off a stylised concrete iceberg into their pool. And sea lions climbed modernist ramps to be face-to-face with the visitors. For a 10-year-old Muriel, the wait to get inside was worth it.
When we did manage to get inside, almost pushing our way, pushing the people aside to get in. And when we did get inside, oh, it was wonderful. There was a cage. Well, I can't say it was a cage. It was too big for a cage. It was like this room. And it was absolutely full of monkeys. Absolutely. And we were pushing our way to get to them. We couldn't get close enough. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I'd never seen anything like it. Never seen anything like it.
Lebetkin Zoo was a modernist theatre with wild beasts placed at the centre of the show. His enclosures were like amphitheatres that offered a close-up and unrestricted view of the animals.
Looking at something you didn't expect to see. You didn't expect to see. Don't ask me the man's name. I've got the book about him, but don't ask me because I couldn't pronounce it. We thought we were with it. I don't know all the modern names you'd say today, but we were with it. My word. But of course there was no health and safety there, so you just climbed anywhere. Not so many fences then.
Though the concrete designs lacked a natural surface, and there was often little for the animals to do, Lebetkin had created a barless, immersive and playful experience for visitors, ideas that all zoos would one day aspire to. He'd achieved something that was at the heart of every successful day at the zoo. Dudley was a playground for the imagination.
My favourite film at the time was Johnny Weissmuller, the world-famous swimmer and film star. And it was like Tarzan. I expected Johnny Weissmuller to come jumping through the trees.
In Tarzan and his mate, Johnny Weissmuller found himself in a jungle that was more Californian than African. But the film did make use of live animals, capturing some realistic wildlife behaviour on camera in a way unusual for the era. One reason for the success of the Tarzan franchise.
Perhaps other people had seen places, but it was the first zoo I'd seen. So I thought it was almost like Africa. And Johnny Weissmuller, my favourite film star, I expected to see him jumping through the trees. I knew he wouldn't. But I thought, you never know. That was it. And the love affair started then with the zoo. And it never went away.
In the 1930s, Hollywood was in full swing, and the movies turned the spotlight onto one particular animal. King Kong was one of the biggest hits of the day, and 100 miles southwest of Dudley, the second oldest zoo in the country, had something just like him. Bristol Zoo had its very own superstar ape.
First time I went, I would think it was 1946. Went with the Sunday school from Clarence Park Baptist Church in Weston-super-Mare. And we got a double-decker bus, green double-decker bus, and children sat 3 to a seat. And then there was a row of chairs down the middle of the aisle. I mean, no health and safety in those days. And it was so exciting because we, with the war just finished, and this was a real treat to be going to Bristol Zoo.
Maureen and her friends had all come to see major animal attraction, Alfred the gorilla.
The big stuff. Who do you think you are? Yes, scary and yet lovable, which sounds ridiculous, but it's true. He was. He was special. And I wouldn't have liked to have been in the cage with him, I have to admit, but he was a great animal. He was almost human. He almost knew that you were going to be there to watch his antics, and he's spitting and he's urinating at you and all the things that he shouldn't do, and yet he seemed to know he shouldn't do.
Alfred had arrived at Bristol Zoo as a youngster in 1930. He was one of only 2 gorillas in Europe and was an instant sensation.
In the 1930s, King Kong is a Hollywood film, and because this is the same sort of time that you have Alfred here, it all heightens the hype surrounding the animal. So it's about going to see this animal that could almost be the gorilla that was in King Kong. It's all about creating this kind of cultural excitement surrounding the species, I think, and Alfred is emblematic of the species.
Alfred was the biggest and longest-lived gorilla in Britain, and visitors felt a sense of connection to him that only a great ape could offer.
Well, he was this big, great brute of a chap there, and he used to sulk most of the time, so he just sat. Well, it was daunting, really, because he was an enormous, great chap. So you stood and looked in awe, really, that's it, yes.
There's certainly more empathy with Alfred than there is with other animals, because he is so almost human. There are records of people looking at Alfred and seeing in his eyes that he understands what it is to be human. And they write this. There's this sense that when they go to the zoo, he loves seeing them. He waits for them to come to see him annually. So there's a sense that he remembers particular people as his friends.
When people come to the zoos, they bring their own stories, their own imaginations, their own ideas about animals with them. So they might not be thinking about ethology, animal behaviour, scientific stuff, is they'll be bringing stories that they've learnt from children's books, from films. And they start attributing human characteristics immediately to animals. Oh, that animal looks sad. Those two monkeys are hugging, they must be in love. Oh, look at those two, they're kissing. Or the big gorilla over there is just like Dad sitting on its backside and doing nothing.
But the feeling of a link with Alfred would get even deeper for the public as, just like them, he endured the burdens of the Second World War. The war brought tough times for zoos. Rationing meant food was scarce, money was tight, and no one wanted dangerous animals escaping from their enclosures.
If a bomb hits, these animals are going to get out. Polar bears at Bristol were shot, and the polar bear enclosure, which was quite new at that time, was turned into an air raid shelter. This was a very difficult time for animals. If they weren't shot, then many of them starved. They didn't have the sort of food that they had before. So there's not just a human tragedy here in terms of war, there's an animal one as well.
Despite the hardship, the Second World War propelled Alfred to international fame.
In 1937, it's said that he's the most famous animal in Europe. By the end of the Second World War, it's said he's the most famous animal in the world. Alfred is seen as sharing the plight of Bristolians during the war. So his food is rationed. He's living in a war-torn city that was bombed on a number of occasions. And so there's this sense that he is a symbol of life lived in the shadow of war, just as normal Bristolians are. But also you have garrisons of, or battalions of GIs, American GIs posted here, and they're told, go to see Alfred. He's the great attraction of Bristol, go and see him, and they go and see him, and allegedly they send some thousands of postcards back to their families back home, and this spreads the message of Alfred. And certainly Alfred's story appears in newspapers in Australia, New Zealand, and America, so his story is global.
From being a simple animal attraction, he became a hero to the people of Bristol.
So there's a poem about Alfred in which he's referred to as Bristol's glamour boy. And this is a Hollywood reference. So he is, he's a star. He's Bristol's star, he is Bristol's glamour boy. The spotlights are firmly positioned on this animal. Everyone knows about his life, what he's doing every day. People go to see him, specifically to see him, as you would go, to a movie premiere to see a particular star, for instance.
Alfred was there through thick and thin, and his death in 1948 hit his fellow Bristolians hard.
Well, Alfred died of TB in 1948. Although for a while it was suggested that he died from fright because an aeroplane flew quite low over the zoo. That was later disproved when they found tuberculosis in his body. And his death was a great sadness for the zoo. The zoo had lost its main animal, its star attraction. For a great deal of time before his death, Bristol Zoo was Alfred and Alfred was Bristol Zoo. It was also a great sadness for the people who went to go to see him because they thought of him as a friend. They thought they'd go to see him specifically and that he understood them. So they were losing a person, a family member, a pet.
Although the loss of Alfred, the cantankerous family friend, would cast a shadow over the place, it would soon be boom time for Bristol Zoo. Rising disposable incomes, skyrocketing car ownership, and a new bridge over the River Severn would see the zoo become more popular than ever as visitors flooded in.
You felt it was a magical place. When you walked in, there were lovely flower beds and grass, and the animals were always, along in a straight row then. And when you got to the end of the path, there used to be a bear, a big brown bear there with a pole in the centre. That used to smell just a little bit, but bear-like, and it was wonderful. We used to spend lots of time there, actually.
You went in and there was a tree there, that lovely tree, and all the flowers, and you looked at, you were in another world, really. And I thought it was lovely. And it was always sunny. I mean, the sun was always shining. Whenever you went to the zoo, it was always shining. Yes. You look forward to the outing, going to the zoo. Yes, a big day in your life.
In this golden age, zoos had got it spot on for the visitors. Lots of exciting animals, intriguing displays, but most important of all, plenty of interaction. The ever-expanding numbers of visitors kept one young keeper on his toes. Don Packham was in charge of the Monkey Temple, where it wasn't just the animals who made a mess.
In those days, the public were allowed to feed. And peanuts, of course, were not loose peanuts. They were peanuts in shells. And the monkeys ate the peanuts inside the shells, but they didn't eat the shells, obviously. So if you can imagine, the Monkey Temple would be covered in monkey shells, which, of course, if it rained, they would then stick to the floor, and it would be an awful job trying to clean that up.
Innocent enough behaviour could become a real problem on a busy day, especially when everyone had the same idea.
People always brought a bun for the elephant. A number of times when you say to the person, please don't feed the elephants. It's only a bun. Or what they don't realise is, I'd say 20,000 people in the zoo, and if only a quarter of those brought in a bun, that's 5,000 buns they're going to offer to an elephant.
The public wanted to get ever closer to the inmates and monkey around themselves, a constant source of worry for keepers.
And I'm afraid the one thing that used to worry keepers probably more than anything else, but one, obviously, animals being given unsuitable objects, and the other was that people climbing on fences. Now, the Monkey Temple was one where my heart was in my mouth several times there, where children would want to climb onto a wall and sit on the wall with their feet dangling over into the Monkey Temple. And, of course, as they leaned forward to look at the monkey, you could see the next stage was that they were going to go over there. And the same thing applied to the bears. So it was something which really the keeper was very glad at the end of the day when the animals hadn't sort of consumed any of the visitors.
But it wasn't just visitors getting eaten that keepers had to watch out for. There were monkey escape plots, aided and abetted by members of the public.
I went home on the Saturday evening, everything was fine, no problems at all, fed them the usual way, they were great. Came in the morning and the Monkey Temple was empty, except for something that hadn't been there the night before, and that was that a ladder had been put over. Somebody broken into the zoo at night, put the ladder over into the temple, and of course, needless to say, all the monkeys had escaped. And it was 36 monkeys roaming around. Now, although it might sound a humorous story, in fact it was not, because those monkeys were potentially very dangerous, and it took us 3 weeks, actually, before we finally captured the very last monkey. They had to take over a flat, actually, so that we could set a trap inside the flat there, and then we used to have to wait for hours outside, hoping that the monkey would go in for the food, and eventually we did get him. But it was a very serious business, and obviously whoever did it thought they were being very, very funny, but they certainly weren't.
Even if you didn't have the cheek to bust out the animals, there was still one thing that could be enjoyed. It was perfectly acceptable to ride on the back of an elephant.
You got there and, gosh, there was an elephant and you could ride on Rosie. And from that time onwards, Rosie was my favourite. And whenever I went to the zoo, and we went every year with the Sunday school, might have gone with my parents in between, and always wanted to ride on Rosie.
Well, they had steps to go up, proper big steps and a proper platform where you climbed onto the top of the elephant. And she walked all along the wide main path, very slowly, led by the keeper, and turned round at the end and came back. I think the rides were about threepence or fourpence, something like that. It was lovely.
They had the seats going either side, and I suppose there were about 5 or 6 children each side.
And then Jumbo, or whoever it was, Judy, I think in this case, would walk along the promenade there, and you'd roll about as the elephant walked along, really. That was the thing, that's it. And it was quite exciting, really, that's it. You'd actually been on an elephant.
1967 was Bristol's busiest year, and crowds weren't deterred by the queues.
If you wanted to get from one side of the zoo to the other, it was quicker to go out of the zoo and walk around and come in at the other gate than walk through the zoo. It was mad. And people would queue for hours to see a particular animal exhibit. And perhaps it was a different mentality in the 60s. People expected to go out and spend ages queuing for things.
Bristol Zoo had novelties to keep visitors interested, like rare white tigers and their adorably cute cubs. It was more popular than ever before. But slowly, everything was beginning to change, and it was driven by a newcomer to the wild animal business: television. Natural history programmes would have a major impact on zoos, but they didn't start out life in glorious high-definition Technicolor.
Well, I've got a handful here, and hello, how are you? And here's BB, a really obstreperous little lion cub.
Early programmes were crude, no-frills affairs. One of the first presenters was George Cansdale, superintendent of London Zoo.
The BBC contacted London Zoo, and my father would have been the one they spoke to, and asked him to take some animals to show on television. But it was before outside broadcasting, and so he took animals to a studio in Alexandra Palace, and he would take in particular animals and talk about them and handle them. And that was and millions of people watched. He got bitten from time to time, and I think that it was live television, and for many people that's why they watched, expecting to be bitten, perhaps hoping he would be bitten.
Oh, I think we'll have to let her go fairly soon. Now look.
Johnny Morris's zookeeper in Animal Magic depicted the zoo as a friendly, safe place with approachable, happy animals.
Television initially reinforces this sense of the animal's a tamed friend. Someone you can go to the zoo and you're not going to be threatened by. You're going to be able to have a nice time with it. It will connect with you. It will recognise you. You can communicate with it if you like. And I think television certainly promotes that idea to begin with on shows like Animal Magic or News from the Zoos.
But another type of natural history programme emerged. It had extraordinary colour footage and was filmed in wild habitats.
So zoos had to react to later television programmes like Attenborough's natural history shows for a number of reasons, and the most important being that they presented animals in a very different way than they had been presented before. There were no bars, there was no pretense or no perceived pretense about animal behaviours and animal environments. It was presenting them in a state of liberty, being as authentically animal as they could possibly be. There's this sense of a camera hidden in the undergrowth recording an animal being animal, and the humans aren't really there.
Now the public could see wild animals in their natural environment, and for some, the comparison was troubling.
Television does change things significantly. It's not a rival to the zoo, because the experience is very different. But what it does do is change people's perceptions of what the wild is and how animals in the wild are. So when they go to the zoo, they suddenly have a new frame of reference. Suddenly they're thinking of the animals they've seen in their living room, on the box in the corner, in a state of liberty. So when they go to the zoo, suddenly captivity is really obvious and quite unsettling. And what they want to see is the animals as they're being on the television screens. You know, being active in the wild places, breeding with their cubs, all this sort of stuff. So it changes people's expectations of what animals should be doing.
People seeing wild animals on television, I think, may have given them a renewed interest to then go and see these animals in the zoo, for real. But also, you then begin to give people a very selected view as to what the wild is like. You know, actually everything's lovely and wonderful, and these wide open spaces where animals can roam. That perhaps it was the origins of people being uncomfortable then about animals in captivity. And a change, therefore, perhaps in the attitude of people towards zoos.
People who had first visited the zoo as children returned as parents, but some harboured doubts as the public mood began to change.
Well, I was pleased to show them what I had seen as a child and the experience that I'd had, but I was beginning to think then that this is not right. Having a zoo purely for the animals to be looked at, and the attitudes generally were changing. People were thinking what an awful thing it was to coop up animals.
Making things even trickier for zoos was the arrival of a new type of competition in the wild animal business.
Certainly that excitement of being in your family, with your family in your vehicle, and as if kind of going on safari without having to go to Africa or wherever else. Much cheaper to just drive around the safari park. And the excitement of, being told to keep your windows wound up as well. That sort of air of tension that there's a lion just right outside your car and there's nothing between you and the lion but your window pane that you could wind down, but you won't because it's too dangerous. So, great family excitement driving through a lion enclosure.
This is lion country right enough, but a green and pleasant land, not a desert or a national park in Kenya's dry bushland. This is England, and we're looking at the Marquis of Bath's latest idea to keep the visitors flocking to see the sights at his stately home of Longleat. So,
in 1966, Longleat Safari Park was unveiled to the world. It appeared to have the answer to public worries about small enclosures and offered an entirely different experience. Safari parks were the brainchild of circus impresario Jimmy Chipperfield.
He set up Longleat, which was the first safari park of its kind outside Africa.
Times were tough for country toffs with large estates, and Chipperfield saw an opportunity. In exchange for a chunk of their land, he would make an animal attraction that made visitors feel like they really were seeing wild animals.
He had the nous to realise that it was possible to have the visitor in the cage, the car, and to drive through the reserve. He'd seen in East Africa that lions pay no attention to people in cars, as long as those people don't get out of the cars. And he thought that what works in Tanzania is going to work in Wiltshire, and he was proved correct. Suddenly, people who were accustomed to seeing lions in fairly small cages, suddenly they could see them in a huge 50-acre field.
And this is about authenticity. It's the latest evolution of the zoo. It's about presenting the animals in a state of liberty. It's about driving through the animal's domain, experiencing a more authentic nature than you would get at the zoo. And that is what underpins the safari park. In the early safari parks, it's less about science, it really is about commerce.
Although initially the public loved the idea that animals had miraculously been set free to do their own thing, the reality was a bit more awkward.
Animals that they'd previously seen in city zoos in fairly small cages, they could now see in a 50-acre field, and they thought, not always correctly, that this was necessarily better for the animal. An animal can be just as unhappy in a 50-acre field as it can in a small cage. But people are deceived into that notion of freedom.
The idea that you were the one in captivity, if you like, stay in your car and you're driving through the animals' habitats. Of course, essentially what you've got is just very large enclosures. They're still enclosures. And some would say actually that driving through an animal's territory can be more disruptive than staying outside of it.
We might have cared about the size of an animal's enclosure, but having paid for our tickets, we still wanted to see them up close.
Sometimes you are still very far away from the animals. If the animal's right over the other side. Even in zoos, some zoos with very large paddocks with hoofstock in. I've seen loads of people who say, I went to see this zoo and it was really boring because the animals were all really far away over the other side of the field. But there's a tendency to think that actually if you go to a zoo, you see a wider variety of animals and you see them more close.
Everybody was saying that safari parks are the new zoo, that the safari parks will cause the death of the traditional zoo. They didn't do anything of the sort. The heyday of safari parks was in the late 60s, early 70s.
Zoos lived to fight another day, but the pressure was on to change their ways. Safari parks weren't the future after all, but a writer called Gerald Durrell had been steadily growing an idea that would change everything.
I've always wanted a zoo as far back as I can remember. In fact, I'm told that the first word I said was zoo and not mama and dada, as normal children do.
Gerald Durrell was the founder of Jersey Zoo, the first to be created specifically to protect endangered species. Conservation would one day become the industry rallying cry.
So we drove through these gates to this beautiful, beautiful parkland set up with trees, and it was a gorgeous day. And I just couldn't believe it. It was open. The enclosures were large. Walking around for the first time, all the animals looked healthy and behaving naturally. And I thought, this really is. It's kind of a little bit of an Eden for animals, a sanctuary for animals.
Durrell had created something revolutionary, but he'd started his career as an animal catcher, a job that led him to transform his thinking about how zoos operated.
So Jerry, in this period when he was collecting for other zoos, he'd bring them back, he'd sell them to the zoos. Then he'd find out that they had died. He'd spent months in the bush with them, trying to learn their needs and feed them properly. So that in itself was very distressing for him. But he was also in a position to see that in the places where he'd been, West Africa, South America, the destruction of habitat was starting, overexploitation of animals. And the zoos of the day, their attitude was, oh, there's plenty more where that came from. And he knew that wasn't the case, and that is why and how he decided to set up his own place.
Jersey Zoo's mission was to become an ark for species survival. No longer was the visitor the main concern.
It was animals first, the needs of the animals to be met first, then the requirements, the needs of the keepers, who were the people looking after the animals, and only then the public.
Animals should not be made to exhibit themselves. They need an area off view to the public that they can go into at any time. They shouldn't be shut out, as some zoos did, in order to put on a show for the public.
For Durrell, the big event animals were not what zoos should be about.
His zoo was certainly not one that was going to exhibit giraffes and tigers and all of that. He felt every animal had some sort of right to exist. And therefore, he kind of went forth what he called the little brown jobs, little obscure creatures, not the big box office creatures.
There was a never-ending supply of little brown jobs that needed Durrell's attention. Saving something like the white-eared pheasant was unglamorous work and meant doing things differently than other zoos.
He had a row of aviaries, 6 aviaries, with nothing in it but white-eared pheasants. You can't save a species from extinction with just one pair of pheasants breeding every year. You need more than one pair. So he built a row of 6 aviaries. No other zoo at that time would have even considered doing that. They'd have built 6 aviaries and probably had 18 different species of birds in them. Gerald Durrell just had 6 aviaries, white-eared pheasants. It was revolutionary. And none of the other zoos at that time, particularly the venerable zoos, like London, like Dublin, like Bristol, none of them really thought this would work because it was an untried, untested formula. You have to make concessions for the public. You're not going to get the public, they said, if you don't exhibit things like tigers, like elephants, like giraffes, none of which Jersey Zoo has ever had. Unless you exhibit that type of animal, you're not going to get the public in.
Durrell's ideas were ahead of their time, and one day all zoos would have to take note of conservation or face possible extinction themselves. But while Jersey was starting to have success with breeding programs, rumblings of a more aggressive anti-zoo feeling were emerging.
What are zoos for?
An animal welfare movement that had been fighting against battery farming and vivisection turned its gaze on zoos and vehemently opposed the very idea of keeping animals in captivity.
Rather than this old model of, animal welfare is important, but animal welfare accepts that people use animals for our own means as long as we treat them kindly while we're doing it. The animal rights theory would reject that and say, well, actually, no, animals have lives of their own, you know, for their own purposes, to fulfil their own desires, to fulfil their own needs. We shouldn't have control over them, full stop. And that leads to questions about how we treat them in, you know, should we have the right to hold animals captive?
It was no longer enough for the focus of zoos to be entertainment. They had to reinvent themselves as bastions of conservation.
With the rise of the environmental movement, animal rights issues, more and more people became concerned about what we were doing by keeping animals in zoos. And I think the zoo world had to respond. They had to change their landscaping. They had to change their types of enclosure. They had to move to barless zoos. They had to move to imitations of natural spaces. Plus, what they had to do was solidly sell this message of conservation. We are keeping animals in the zoos because it's necessary. We need breeding stock. We exchange animals between other zoos, and we're doing it for good conservation reasons. And that's what they do. These important zoos do that.
The zoos that generations had grown up with were being transformed, and many of the large, iconic animals were phased out. But the reasons people went back were the same as ever.
A lot of zoo people would like to say people want to come and learn about animals. That's why they come to the zoo. I think the truth is more that people want something else to do with their family. It's a day out. And I hear lots of people saying, you know, I meet them out and I say they work at the zoo and they say, oh, I haven't been there for ages because, you know, my children grew up. And so there's almost, people have an excuse to come to the zoo to bring their children or their grandchildren. It's a family day out, but it's also seen as good for a children's education.
Zoos have come full circle. A mission of educational improvement, and animal science still competes with the need to entertain and bring in the visitors. Not everybody likes them, but zoos remain wildly popular for families. And stories about the elephants and giraffes, penguins and rhinos are handed down from one generation to the next. Whatever the reason we go, whether it's science or entertainment, because it's educational or amusing, there's nothing quite like a day at the zoo.
Creating the Universe with Jim Al-Khalili and the Big Bang, Lost Horizons, coming up next on BBC 4. Then a whirlwind journey through triumph and tragedy with a profile of snooker genius Alex Hurricane Higgins, the People's Champion, at midnight.